Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to this episode of Altitude, a monthly look at the world of aviation and air traffic control. My name is Ben Sanford. I'm a product manager here at NATS, and I'm excited to be hosting this session this month. I'm sure everyone can agree that the last couple of years have been pretty rough for the aviation industry, but it does finally feel like we're emerging from the shadow of the COVID crisis. The question for us now is, what role can air traffic management play, both in helping to secure that recovery, but also in supporting airports as traffic heads back to 2019 levels and maybe even beyond? The big pre-pandemic challenges of capacity, operational resilience, and sustainability are all coming back on the agenda. Advancements in air traffic management, whether in terms of airspace management or new technologies, are well placed to deliver against all those objectives, and usually for a fraction of the cost and time required for other capital investments like new runways, taxiways, or terminals. But what should our priorities be, and what challenges remain? Here to dig into this topic with me are my guests and colleagues, Andy Taylor, our Chief Solutions Officer for Digital Towers, and Andy Foxall, Head of International Business Solutions. I'll do my best to make sure I don't get my left Andy and my right Andy mixed up. Hello to you both and welcome to Altitude.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Ben. Hello, everybody.
Welcome, guys. So before we kick off and start digging into this, let's just have a quick introduction, let people know what our background is and what we're involved with. Andy Taylor, you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Ben. I'm the Chief Solution Officer for NATS Digital Towers. I'm an ex-air traffic controller by training, worked at many airports, but my focus these days is on our development and deployment of digital tower solutions. I guess actually probably worthwhile just pointing to what a digital tower is, perhaps, Ben, if you're happy for me to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So a digital tower basically is one that utilizes cameras along with all other forms of data integrated, but providing that to controllers. Now that can be remotely, but in actual fact, in many cases, and in fact, I think in most cases, we're actually looking at deployments of digital towers on site at an airport. So it can be on site or off site, but it's using cameras and integrating all of that data together to provide controllers with a better situational awareness than they get from a traditional physical tower.
Super. Thanks, Andy. I'm sure we'll come back to that in more detail further down our discussion. And Andy Foxall, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. So like Andy, my background is operational air traffic control. I started in the Air Force, actually, as an assistant. And I spent 4 wonderful years following the Red Arrows around, doing all their flight planning, display planning, and planning all the transits between air shows. I joined NATS in '98 and spent 20 incredible years as an air traffic controller at Gatwick, working with the most amazing bunch of people. Some great air traffic controllers, airside teams, and doing crazy things with a single runway, making it one of the busiest single runway operations in the world. I joined the commercial business in 2017 as a senior consultant, working across India, Asia, Middle East. 2 years in business development, focusing on India and the Middle East. And then in May this year, I was appointed as head of business solutions and responsible for all our international solutions across the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. And for myself, I've been at NATS for nearly 20 years now. I joined trying to become an air traffic controller, but didn't actually end up making it, and spent 10 years as an IFP, instrument flight procedure designer, working on airspace changes and arrival departure procedures at airports, both in the UK and internationally. And then 5 years ago, I moved into the product management team, looking at developing and enhancing the technical products that we have available to support ANSP and airport customers around the world. The main one I'm responsible for is Intelligent Approach, which is our final approach spacing tool, which enables airports to deliver maximum capacity in arrivals onto their runway. And we've recently may have seen a press release. It just went live in Toronto. We are deploying it around the world. It's quite a good success story at the moment, helping airports to deliver more with their existing capabilities. We'll, again, talk about more of these things through the conversation. I thought, first of all, why don't we sort of take a look at the state of the industry at the moment, based on what we're seeing around our customers and the people we're talking to. Andy Taylor, do you want to sort of start us off there?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So mine's clearly a technology-focused approach with our customers, and those customers are both airports in the UK for our domestic operations, but also all around the world, supporting Andy Foxall and our various teams in the Middle East and Asia, but operating all around the world. So certainly my view is on the back of that sort of global discussion that we've been having recently, and in fact that we've been having over 2 years of pandemic. So from my perspective, what I'm seeing is obviously the sector, aviation and airports in particular, recovering now, and recovering in varying degrees. So some back to pre-pandemic levels very quickly, some not quite there yet. So there's a variance, I think, across the industry in terms of how things are recovering, depending, I think, in particular on kind of whether things are airports are international long-haul flight focused, or whether they have a sort of mix with more domestic or inter continent on their own continent kind of flights. So on that basis, while there's a variance there, I think there's one common theme coming forward, which is that technology is absolutely seen as a really important way of stepping away from their previous operations and moving to the future, which I think COVID clearly has accelerated a lot of those discussions and a lot of that technology deployment. So from my perspective, I'm now seeing an acceleration in terms of the need to deploy technology, and also to develop new strategy to deploy that technology. Excellent.
Andy Foxall, what's your perspective from the Middle East angle?
Well, I agree with Andy in terms of green shoots of recovery from around the world, but I think it's important to note that at the moment, whilst we see some really good activity across the Middle East and throughout Europe, it's picking up. The world is recovering at different rates, and that's largely down to how COVID restrictions have been lifted from country to country, down to the size of the domestic market versus the international market. And we might just dip into that in a bit more detail. But I'm really encouraged, actually, by the level of enthusiasm, and especially having been able to get back out and meet people face to face. You know, I think there is a pent-up frustration of people. We're not designed to live our life behind Teams. We're designed to interact with people and meet people and shake people's hands. And I think people are looking forward to getting back to being able to live their lives with a degree of normality again.
And Andy, you've recently come back from a visit to India, where they seem to be bouncing back really well. Can you give us a bit more perspective on how things are going over there, and what is it that's driving that in the Indian market?
So I have, and I had an amazing 2-week trip back end of March. Bearing in mind, pre-COVID, I was leading a large project out in India, and I was out there almost every month for the period and the duration of the project. Pre-COVID, we'd been seeing some real growth within the Indian market, and then of course India, like many of the other countries through COVID, had some really difficult times. India's a vast country, right, with population of nearly 1.4 billion people, a landmass of 1.2 million square miles, and I think it's not easy to travel from Mumbai in the west to get to Kolkata in the east, or to get in a car from Chennai in the south and drive up to Delhi in the east. And you need to fly. That's how people travel around and do business within India. And in recognition of that, the government have a sponsored regional connectivity scheme. We call it UDAN. And the scheme is basically looking to create a number of new routes throughout India, new airports coming online, older airports being developed, but with the aim of connecting people so that people can travel around more easily and for a cheaper price. And so the domestic market in India is huge. It's roughly 80% of their total market, total aviation sector, with international traffic being roughly 20%, and that is picking up as well. But if we look at the domestic market alone, it's almost 100% of what the pre-COVID levels were, and in some airports it's busier. It's busier than it was pre-COVID. And we've been supporting aviation in India now for 12 years, from working with all of the four major airports: Mumbai, Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore. And we've had, enjoyed really great support from all the stakeholders over there. And we're really proud to be just a small part of the Indian aviation success story.
Thanks, Andy. In terms of sort of challenges that we're seeing that existed pre-COVID, I mentioned at the beginning, we're sort of seeing things about capacity, resilience, sustainability there coming back into the discussion. How is that sort of playing out in terms of customer interactions, what they're looking for, what their focus is at the moment? I don't know, Andy Taylor, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, on the technology side of things, there's, air traffic service providers and airports are both finding themselves in an unusual situation whereby traffic growth is sudden. Prior to this, we've been used to a relatively gradual but continual growth. And certainly after a couple of years of operating at incredibly low levels, to suddenly then come back to that high level of demand, I think is clearly posing a lot of problems to the industry, and not least of all for air traffic control in terms of having to come back to those pre-COVID levels very quickly. And I think, again, this is where ANSPs are seeing, air traffic service providers are seeing that supporting their controllers with tools is a really positive way of being able to cope with sudden increase. So I think as much as it was really being seen as a way of supporting that growth previously, it's actually now seen as a way of being able to maintain and react to sudden shocks to the industry. And I think everybody now is looking at the resilience of their operation. So that's in terms of what I'm saying there, really, where it may be that traffic levels rise and fall, but also resilience in terms of contingency. So certainly from my perspective on digital towers, there's a lot of discussion with airports and air traffic service providers to ensure that there is a contingency capable of their normal operations, and normal being the new normal or pre-COVID normal. Either way, having that kind of level of resilience. I think everybody's taken a look over the last 2 years at their operations and seen the fragility where it does exist, and wanted to resolve that. I mean, I was actually going to come back to you in terms of you mentioned that intelligent approach, time-based spacing was now operational in Canada, and for me that's an interesting question. How's that going with the controllers suddenly seeing a new tool in operation and also increased traffic, I'm assuming?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that when intelligent approach was first born as TBS at Heathrow, it was to address a specific resilience issue around the airport coping with the impacts of strong headwinds. And so the tool was developed to give them that ability to cope with the headwind impact on the arrival spacing. But now we're seeing a different sort of resilience that intelligent approach is helping with, and that the controllers at Heathrow who have trained with using the intelligent approach system have that much more confidence as the traffic picks up, that they know how to put aircraft on those final approach spacing markers. They've got a line on the screen they know they can aim for, they know it's safe. And so airports like Toronto now going live, they've got that now sort of a bit more of a blanket, a comfort blanket that they can see what is safe and what is not. They can aim for a marker they know is providing the right level of separation. And so as traffic does do this sort of unpredictable return to normal, and you have a busy period and then a quiet period, as those busy periods come back, you've got that sort of consistent delivery. You know where the marker is, you know how to deliver onto that marker. And so that's sort of an added benefit to having a tool like this support your operation, that you know, obviously we've certainly within NATS, we've been trying to make sure that the controllers have a certain amount of simulator time with normal traffic levels to keep up their skills and make sure they don't get rusty. But having the tools in place to support them with that has really been quite valuable for them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point in terms of the intuitive nature of the tools that we've developed for final approach spacing, but likewise for tower control support as well. To the extent that it's very much a similar kind of experience to the smartphone for me, actually, where you don't have to read through huge amounts of manuals to learn how to use the system. It is actually a system that works very well with what you want to use it for. And likewise, we've been designing tools that are deployed on digital tower platforms for exactly that purpose. And some of the artificial intelligence work that we were doing pre-COVID, again, we're now restarting that work, having paused a lot of our development programs. But that work's now coming back in at a pace in terms of being able to develop further intuitive supporting kind of tools that we can deploy on that digital tower platform.
And Andy Foxhall, sustainability, is that something you're hearing more from the customers you're talking to? Is that back up the agenda, or is it still sort of sitting below capacity and resilience? What sort of stuff you're hearing from the customers?
No, I think it's definitely gone to the very close to the top of the agenda. I think there's been over the last couple of years we've created a bit of headroom within our businesses to be able to focus on other areas of our operation. And I think COVID has taught us that when we build back, we need to do it slightly differently. There's a big focus now on reducing our carbon footprint. And things we will have to operate differently in the future. There's a big drive to make aeroplanes more efficient, and of course we have our part to play as an air traffic organisation in making the air traffic operation as efficient as we can as well. And just reflecting on what you were saying about intelligence approach, my view is that we should always be looking to optimise the operation. Any latent capacity that is in the operation means additional fuel burn. It means additional cost for the airlines. It means capacity wasted, and so therefore thinking about any digital support tool or controller support tool which allows you to standardize the operation and make it more consistent and take out that variation that naturally we as humans bring into the operation, I think contributes not only to a smoother operation, but to that environmental aspect as well.
Mm.
Yeah, so, that carbon sort of neutral approach actually is an interesting one. You just sort of sparked a thought in my mind, just in terms of we've been deploying things very differently over the last 2 years. When you consider that we've had intelligent approach being delivered into Canada, digital towers, Singapore, Hong Kong, the Middle East, all with travel constraints, globally affecting those. And interestingly, we've developed ways of deploying those kind of solutions without having to completely pause, but in different ways. And I think potentially that's kind of helping us in terms of perhaps more cost effective and likewise more environmentally friendly ways of supporting operations all around the world. And I couldn't help but have to point to your background, Andy, because obviously that isn't a background, and you are sitting in in Dubai as we speak. So somewhat more glamorous than either Ben or myself. But either way, though, we are delivering those things in a semi-remote kind of way.
We are, and I mean, I think one of the advantages about being, the way we have our business set up, where we have a UK base, we have a Middle East base, we have a Singapore and a Hong Kong office. We're closer to the customer, and so, thinking pre-COVID, when people were traveling all around the world, myself included, I think now we have a combination of being closer to the customer because of the way we operate our business, but also we don't need to do as much travel because we have other ways of communicating, and that's I think is representative of many businesses, not just a NATS thing.
Pre-COVID, we had a variety of large projects going on around the world, build additional terminals, different runways, major capital investment going on in expanding airports. Obviously, COVID put the brakes on a lot of that, a lot of those projects. How are we seeing the airports coming back? Are those projects back on the agenda, or are they now looking for ways of delivering that capacity, bridging that gap to support the growth without investing quite so much money in what they're doing?
So I think it's very much at the forefront of people's minds in terms of spending unnecessary capex or OpEx, and it's about looking to deploy just in time rather than something big right at the beginning of a 5-year, 10-year expansion program. Is to be able to deploy what do you need right now to enable you to hit that growth curve. And I think the one thing I think we need to get better at is keeping ahead of that growth curve. So pre-COVID, aviation growth around the world was accelerating at a phenomenal rate, but we were always kind of just underneath that glass ceiling. Now we've had a pause. We're building back. We were trying to do it in an intelligent way. We have equipment and support tools that can help us to do that. And I think the focus is very much going to be on, okay, we've got one runway, we've got two runways. We were thinking about building a third or fourth runway, but actually let's just go back to the drawing board. What can we get out of this single runway or this dual runway? How can we sweat this asset and get the maximum potential out of that one runway? And I think that will be the focus now going forward. We'll be looking to see how we can be more intelligent about, or how we can be more clever about how we deploy infrastructure, use our infrastructure, and support that with technology.
I think from a digital towers perspective, there's been a positive shift towards the technology deployment, though. So while a lot of programs have perhaps paused, both our own and around the world, certainly in terms of the digital tower kind of programs, what I'm seeing with those is a great deal of discussion around modular build, perhaps with a slightly revised airport expansion timescale, which again, our digital tower models are all built in a modular kind of way, particularly where we're doing larger or more complex airports, and we take the solution from Searage Technologies, who are our partner in Canada, and I've mentioned on many discussions before that the NATS is invested in Searage. In fact, we invested further during the pandemic, so we are now the complete shareholder for Searage. But with that aside, the focus on deploying what's required in that sort of modular build, where a delayed second or third, fourth runway will now come on stream 5 years, 10 years later. That still means that the digital solution can be deployed for the existing airport or for a slightly changed master plan, with that longer term build still capable with addition to the initial system. The other thing that I've seen real key in terms of that post-COVID recovery is also the focus on enhancing what airports have currently. So that may be a physical tower, but actually, as Andy suggested, being able to do more with what they currently have. So support tools and also being able to see areas that are distant more closely, more clearly, and areas that are otherwise invisible, say terminal areas that are at some distance from the control tower, bringing all of those into the individual controllers on a controller workstation, which is digital, is certainly ways of helping controllers in delivering even more capacity with what the airport has, or perhaps in a more efficient or even a safer kind of operation because of that greater situational awareness and visibility. So that hybrid, enhancing an existing tower is a key part of digital tower solutions too.
Yeah,
I think, Andy, as well, one of the really interesting aspects of digital towers, which I know we've spoken about previously, is it's almost like a blank canvas. So currently, most air traffic operations at an airport are delivered from a tower, 100 feet up in the air. Okay, so you are, by virtue of the fact you're high up and you're looking down, your view, your outlook is restricted. If you were to redesign that, you wouldn't necessarily have a bird's eye view of the airport. You'd be at ground level, looking around the corner into cul-de-sacs, and you can absolutely do that with the digital towers and the cameras, and you can start from that blank sheet of paper and say, right, as an air traffic controller, what is it you really need to see? As opposed, what can we give you? What do you need to look at? Whereas currently, unless you have a really good, really good augmented operation, that is something which is not available to you because of where you're situated.
No, that's exactly right. That is why with the Searage team we developed 5 different models of digital tower, so that there was one that would suit every kind of airport, from operating a small satellite airfield from within the visual control room of a parent airport to the biggest international hubs, but all parts in between, and there are a lot of in-betweens as well in terms of complex operations where you've got instrument commercial traffic and visual operations of light aircraft in the circuit. So building solutions that are specifically aimed at that kind of capability. And it's providing something more than the physical tower. Again, from my perspective, we've inherited quite a lot from the first 100 years of aviation in terms of control towers and looking out windows, to now digitize all of that out of the window view, which is actually, for a tower controller, the majority of the information that they are processing is visual and out of the window. So actually to digitize that and then to be able to provide it in enhanced views, or to add supporting capabilities, AI prompts, tools, auto tracking, where a pan-tilt zoom camera can act as a pair of electronic binoculars and follow an aircraft or a vehicle around the airfield. And even on large airports where we have the capability to do that, and then to hand over to another set of binoculars 2 kilometers further down the airfield, where you get the benefit of 30 times zoom from 2 kilometers further away from the tower. So you suddenly have that ability to instantaneously jump as a controller from one part of the airport to another, see it in a full panoramic way, so that you have a complete situational awareness of that area that you want to look at that particular period of time. And it just gives so much more than what we had before. So yeah, I think this is definitely the cusp of a step change for tower operations.
Yeah, I think we've seen a similar thing with intelligent approach on the approach side of the operation. Obviously, the tool initially went live at Heathrow. Now it's live in Toronto. We're currently getting toward the end of the project with Schiphol. Those are big airports, lots of runways. but the tool is, again, flexible. It's got scale. It can cope with a single runway airport in mixed mode operations. We're currently developing further tools for those mixed mode runways, so you can actually get the most out of a runway, no matter how many runways you've got, what configuration they're in. There's different modules that are appropriate for your airport, whether you have LVPs, whether you have mixed mode, whether you have whatever it might be, dependent operations. The tool is flexible enough to cope with all of that. And so, yeah, while it may have been seen as the tool for the big major hubs, it can also help with these single runway operations or airports that run in mixed mode at the same time. And it's all about getting the most you can out of that investment you've made in your existing runways, taxiways, that hard infrastructure that costs so much to put in place.
Oh, you mentioned mixed mode there, actually, Ben. Do you want to tell people a bit more about where that's going now as well? Because obviously Heathrow is an arrival-only sort of environment on one runway, while the other runway operates in departures. But you're obviously talking about arrivals, departures on a single runway.
Yeah, I mean, with the system going live in Toronto, they have modes of operation where they have a mixed mode runway in some of their configurations, and the tool does support that. So if you've got a spacing policy in place, let's say you've said you need 6 mile gaps to fit departures in, the system will give you markers 6 miles apart. But what we're looking at doing now is enhancing that. So rather than just having a distance-based marker system, we can start looking again at the live wind data and tailoring the size of that gap based on the wind to provide aircraft landing at the same time apart, giving the right length of time for a departure to take place. And then further from that, we'll start looking at the actual departure aircraft types so that we can tailor the size of the gap in between arrivals, so that a 787 going intercontinental will have a much larger runway gap needed for its departure roll than a business jet going a few hundred miles to another small airport somewhere. So the system will be able to start managing those gaps in a much more sensible way and optimizing how that mixed mode runway can use its capacity to the most efficient way.
Yeah, I mean, again, this sort of strikes me in terms of both Andy and I have worked in consultancy roles and had many air traffic controllers and air traffic service providers ask us about our operations in London and how they could repeat some of those kind of things in terms of maximum use of a single runway, like in Gatwick, or optimizing segregated operations like at Heathrow. And certainly the kind of tools that we have now with Intelligent Approach, providing those kind of markers, especially ones that can provide the flexibility on a mixed mode single runway operation. Those are the kind of tools that 10 years ago everyone would have really have liked, but clearly they are available now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's time we took some questions from our audience. If you haven't noticed, there is a submit a question box available to you. If you want to put something in there, we'll try and address a few of those before we wrap things up. I've got a question here from Bash asking, what are the biggest challenges you face as air traffic control post-COVID? So I'm not sure which Andy would like to take that one.
So I'm going to stick with in fact, I'm going to answer it in two parts, but I'll start with the digitization because that's the theme of what we've been discussing. I think digitization is the heart of or at the core of being able to deliver and unlock future capacity. So I think the real challenge is going to be about how quickly we'll be able to deploy new technology and how quickly the ANSPs are going to be able to integrate that technology into their operation. And I think as we go forward and as we see the recovery becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, I see these tools, these support tools, sitting at the core of our operation. The second part, I think, which just springs to mind is we've got to get better at working together with all stakeholders across the ATC network or the aviation network. So all too often, Andy, we've done a lot of work globally. We operate in silos, and I think the biggest challenge going forward as we start integrating new technology and the recovery starts to really take hold is we just need to make sure we're communicating with all the key stakeholders within our sphere of operation, whether it be the airlines, the ANSPs, authorities, regulators, ATC. I think that's going to be key to unlocking the future potential and making sure that all of the technology we've been talking about is optimized.
Excellent.
Yeah,
thanks, Andy.
That's a really good point. That is a good point. I think for me, again, that challenge has often been because of two totally different environments, two different operation centres, perhaps of an airport operator and of air traffic control, and also different providers of the technology, airport companies to ANSPs. But I think good demonstrations like in Hong Kong, where we have digital tower platform, which is being used. It's one system, but two operations, because the airport operator and the air traffic service provider both have access to that, but for specific supporting capabilities for their part of the operation. But the fact that they're able to see the same thing from the same perspective, I think, is really important. As air traffic controllers, we've always sort of seen ourselves as being right in the centre of the airport, because generally we physically are. But actually, the view that we have is not necessarily shared with the rest of the airport. And CDM systems certainly help that. But I think actually being able to actually see out of the airport, out of the tower, but from the airport operations centre or wherever it may be around the airport through that digital feed, that's really quite a way of helping air traffic controllers and airports to work better together.
Excellent. Andy, I think this one's probably more for you. Cesar is asking, I'm going to paraphrase, he's asking about artificial intelligence, and that could provide solutions in the airport operation, but how do we incorporate that technology when reduced budgets, everything's much tighter? What's the sort of future for artificial intelligence with these constrained price mode?
So again, I would take that back to the modular side of things, and actually artificial intelligence, from the work that we've been doing and Seerage has been doing over the last 5-10 years, has shown us quite clearly that artificial intelligence works best when you actually have a really clear use case, focusing specifically on what do you want the artificial intelligence to be monitoring, triggering, automating. As soon as you do that, the performance of the system is particularly high, and actually by focusing on something like that, you can basically get the maximum return for the most focused investment. So you perhaps don't need the entire airport covered. It may be a specific area that you need, if it's looking at aprons or if it's looking at runways in particular, whatever it may be. So actually you can kind of pretty much bite off as whatever you need, but then build that. As soon as we started deploying digital tower platforms out, and as I say, airports and air traffic service providers taking them, then those AI solutions effectively start to become applications, to go back to my analogy of a smartphone. So again, you get as many as you need, or as few as you need. Once you have them, they're available. If you then don't need them for a period, let's hope that COVID type scenarios don't occur again. But I think everybody's potentially now planning for that, to have the ability to turn something off if not required, but then to be able to switch it back on as soon as it is required. That's really quite important, and technology can do that more so than we can do with staff. So it's not specifically about removal of staff. This is actually just about supporting the staff you have in a much better way.
Thanks, Andy. Andy Foxhall, I think this is probably more in your area. Question from Vikas. what's the outlook for Southeast Asia in terms of traffic growth?
Hi, Vikas. So I think I touched on this a little earlier in the conversation. Some of the countries in Southeast Asia, if you think about Singapore, Hong Kong, they really struggled through the pandemic. Almost, no traffic at all. They don't have any. They don't have a domestic market, so they are really reliant upon international traffic. And whereas we've enjoyed in Europe and in the Middle East, and as we've seen in India, really strong bounce back, it's going to take a little longer, I think, in Southeast Asia. Having said that, the forecast actually is really good, and I'm testing myself now on some numbers that I read a week or two ago. But the airline growth forecast for the next 20 years in Southeast Asia is round about 5.5%. You compare that to China, it's very similar. It's round about 5.5%. Globally, it's 4%. So I think what the industry is saying is we're confident that in Southeast Asia it's going to grow back. It's going to grow back strong, and actually the forecasts for that region, looking out 20 years from now, is strong. So I think there's every reason to be optimistic.
Excellent. And I think probably time for one more question. Andy Taylor, this one's for you. You referred to hybrid digital towers during the discussion today. Jonathan would like to know, what does that mean, and what are the benefits for an airport to a hybrid digital tower?
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So a hybrid digital tower for NATS and Seerage is basically one where within your physical existing control tower, or perhaps a new but physical control tower, you augment each of the control positions as necessary with a digital controller work position. When I say digital, I mean one that provides the out of the window views in a digital way, so camera views. But going back to what I said earlier about controllers in towers, as I'm sure you're familiar, it's all about looking out the window, but you can only get so much by looking out the window. So by taking that full view out of the window beyond where you can perhaps see direct line of sight, and putting that onto the screen. So that could mean a controller at Heathrow, for example, who may be sitting in the tower, being able to see areas of the east end of the airport, which is maybe 2 kilometres away from them, as if they were sitting on top of the edge of the Terminal 2 building, for example, or Terminal 5 at the opposite end. So they stay in position, but they have this digital picture brought to them. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of a hybrid digital tower solution. Digital displays, video displays, augmentation within your physical tower.
Cool. And we've got actually one excellent one to finish off with here from Dante. It says, what are your expectations for 2023? Andy Foxall, let's give that one to you first.
Well, I'm inherently an optimistic person, so I think the outlook is good. Having spoken to people around the world, I think it's clear to see that people want to get travelling again. I think there will be some consolidation of airlines. We've seen that in India. We're also seeing some innovative thinking from in places like Singapore, where they're looking to introduce hubs elsewhere around the world, so that if this was to happen again, then they've got some resilience within their operation, and they can perhaps continue operating, whereas currently they've not been able to because of the size of because they don't have that domestic market to fall back on. So I think it will take some time. I think 2022 will be a road to recovery, and I think 2023 I'm feeling good, and I think it's going to be a busy 12 months.
Excellent. And Andy Taylor, what's your perspective?
Well, again, for me, continued deployment of technology, innovative solutions continuing now to be developed for those digital tower platforms. But I think in general, deployment at airports is absolutely, I think, something which is going to be at the forefront of what we see happening in 2023 and the next 5 years, as well as the sort of well understood remote side of things. But I think a very strong on airport growth.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. If you heard something today that you'd like to discuss with us, then you have an excellent opportunity coming up. All three of us will be attending World ATM Congress in Madrid later this month. You can find us on the NATS stand number 828. However, if you aren't able to attend the show in person, we're also offering virtual appointments this year, which can give you a chance to speak to some of our other colleagues about how our products and services could help address the challenges you're facing in your operation. To book a virtual session, you can visit our website, nats.aero, and there's a big box on there that says NATS at World ATM Congress 2022. And further down that page, you'll find a request a virtual appointment form, which you can fill in, and we'll arrange a session with you. So all that remains is for me to thank the Andys for being here with me and to thank you for watching. I hope you found today's session interesting and fun, and we hope to see some of you in Madrid in a couple of weeks. If you have any feedback for us or ideas for future topics you'd like us to cover, you can email us at info@nats.co.uk or tweet us @nats. And keep an eye on our social channels for details of the next show. Thank you and goodbye.